Hello, this is Alyssa Mulder, and for my practical assignment, I conducted an interview with a high school special education teacher as well as a high school general education teacher. So first I want to provide an introduction to both of these teachers. I'm going to call them Mr. Sped and Mr. Gen Ed for the sake of anonymity. So Mr. Sped has 8 years of experience teaching special education. He works mostly with 9th graders, even though he does work with students 9th to 12th grade. His focus is on students with autism spectrum disorders, but he also has experience with students with emotional and learning disabilities. His daily schedule, he works in the social studies classrooms, but he also teaches a separate learning and social skills course. As for Mr. Gen Ed, he is a new teacher, so he just finished his first year teaching 11th grade U.S. history as well as 12th grade government. He's responsible for 6 classes of students that alternate every other day, and he gets a planning period each day. So next I want to go over some of the strategies that Mr. Sped recommended. So specifically for students with learning disabilities, he suggests providing testing accommodations, scaffolding the activities, and then after giving directions, going back to those students who require that extra support and paraphrasing the directions and making sure that they understand. He also suggests creating an inclusive environment, and that's especially helpful within group activities. Then when talking about the students with emotional or behavioral disabilities, he said that typically there's a plan in place for each of these students, and it's important that the general education teachers follow this plan. However, if there's no plan in place, it's important to promote a positive environment and make sure that there's clear and consistent rules that are fair and followed on a daily basis. He also talked quite a bit about building rapport and how it's important specifically for these students that they have a relationship with the teacher, and that can really help them communicate when they're having a hard time. As for which accommodations to choose, Mr. Sped recommended finding what works for that student and then sticking with it, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel or throwing everything at the student. He basically just said it's important that you find what works and you stick with it. He strongly recommends being patient with the students, and a lot of his comments in general seem to really mirror the themes within the FAT video. He talks a lot about respect and inclusion and caring about the kids in a way that meets their needs. So I also asked for advice from Mr. Sped about how to interact with other teachers and parents and what his suggestions were for positive interactions. He said that when dealing with other teachers, it's really just important to be professional at all times and keep the student as the priority of all discussions. As for parents, he said it helps when you only use email for minor or concrete details like dates and times, but when dealing with grades or behavior, it's really important to talk to them over the phone or in person so that nothing gets misconstrued. Okay, so I want to switch over to some of the takeaways from Mr. Gen Ed. When talking about general strategies, he said, again, similar to Mr. Sped, that relationships are key and that the students have to know that you care about them. As for learning disabled students, he basically said it's important to trust the professionals and implement the plan as it's written and track progress. As for students with emotional or behavioral issues, he said that basically they need a break sometimes. So when things start to get heated, you can tell them, hey, go take a walk, go to the bathroom, grab a drink of water, and then when they come back, talking to them about the issue in private and treating them like adults. It's also important to convey positive messages to parents as often as possible, which he said really helped him throughout the year. Okay, so I want to talk about the implications for me as a future teacher. When I asked Mr. Sped about being a new teacher, he basically said that the learning curve is hard, but when you know your content and you keep up to date, that learning curve can get easier. He said it's important to be prepared and organized. And then Mr. Gen Ed reiterated the need for strong student-teacher relationships. And Mr. Sped said that, we're all a team and it's important that you ask questions when you don't know something because every school does things a little bit differently. So I found this experience to be extremely helpful, both from a SPED and general education teacher perspective.